Apocalypse. That's the word all over the front of today's newspapers as Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, speaks to a parliamentary committee predicting there'll be an apocalypse in food prices, that inflation is a serious problem, but nothing to do with me, Gov. It's not my fault. I mean, after all, I didn't know there was going to be a war in Ukraine. Now, did I? Well, let me tell you, right from the very start, I was absolutely shocked and appalled that Bailey was appointed governor of the Bank of England. There were some really, really good candidates out there, people like Gerard Lyons, who'd actually been Boris's economic advisor when he was mayor of London. People who had a plan for Britain after Brexit to start, not just reaching out to the world, but to helping businesses in our country. But no, they didn't want that. They wanted Mr. Bailey, who still seems to regret Brexit completely, and whose name, when he ran the FCA, and incidentally when he was there, nothing changed. You know, people getting ripped off, ludicrous fees in financial services, nothing happened, earning him the nickname Andrew Out to Lunch Bailey. Now, I'm not being a hypocrite here because I quite like going out to lunch, but this wasn't because of his habit of going out for boozy lunches. It was because he was never around when there was a problem and did nothing. So from the start, I thought this was a really, really bad appointment. Since January last year, pretty much every single week, out there on YouTube and across the airwaves, I've been saying inflation is coming. We learned some lessons many, many years ago. We saw what happened in the early 1920s. We saw what happened in the 70s, the 80s. If you increase the amount of money that exists within the system, and that increase in money is chasing the same number of goods and services, have a little guess what happens. Prices go up and you get shortages. It's quite simple, really. And yet, despite massive money creation by this government, not just during the pandemic, but actually through quantitative easing in every year since 2008, we have actually stoked our own monetary inflation. We haven't at the Bank of England learned all the lessons from history that were there and were so clear. And from the beginning of last year, whenever pundits like myself talked about inflation, we were told, no. Inflation isn't going to happen. And then when it started to happen, they said it was transitory. And such appears to be the hold of the Bank of England and the Treasury on number 10, that as recently as October, Boris Johnson was telling the House of Commons there isn't a problem. Well, now we know that it is going to hit 10%. And yes, of course, there's a price shock coming from Ukraine, just as we had the oil price shock back in 1973 after the Yom Kippur War. Yes, Mr. Bailey, I accept that this part of it is not your fault, but you're doing the same as Sleepy Joe in America. America claims, they claim the White House, that inflation is all because of Putin. They call it the Putin price hike, and we are doing the same. The Bank of England's job is to control inflation. They have created the conditions in which inflation already had a big hold way before Putin invaded Ukraine. Are we headed for an apocalypse? Well, there's no question that food prices will go up. 80%, for example, of sunflower oil consumed in this country comes from Ukraine. The effect on wheat prices may well be pretty dramatic. And I'm not underplaying it, but I suspect if there's going to be a real apocalypse for people's households, it will be energy that is even more serious than food. And that isn't just about world prices. It's about the fact we're not extracting the oil and gas that is there within our country. The Americans get their gas at half the price we do. They produce their own. It's about time we did, but of course, number 10 in the Bank of England won't change their minds. So look, I'm not pretending for one moment we're not headed for very, very tough times. I think the country is, and I'll admit, it doesn't affect me particularly, but for those on fixed incomes, pensioners and the like, those on low incomes, it's going to be a really, really horrid couple of years. But to see the governor of the Bank of England using words like apocalypse, trying to make excuses for his own failings, frankly, is pretty poor. It's about time the Prime Minister called him into number 10 and said, buck your ideas up, or we'll get rid of you. That's what I'd do.